VikesNow, we are 39 days from the regular season when the Vikings take on those New York Giants. We think Sam Darnold will probably be quarterback. We're starting to realize that we don't want that. We want the new guy to play because he looks like a total stud. But with a triumphant return to VikesNow after a 2-month hiatus because of a new job, Josh Frey, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, man. Good to be back on the show. We'll see. I haven't podcasted in a long time, so we'll see how rusty I am coming back onto this one.
What about the Vikings knowledge? Is that still honed, fine-tuned?
Oh, I keep up with Vikings territory all the time. So, yeah, I'm still locked in on that level.
Okay, and then what are you doing now I know you're writing for Vikings territory in the backdrop, but what's your primary gig now?
Yeah, so I took a role to become the digital producer at KAAL here in Rochester, the ABC6 News TV station. So it's basically just managing their website and clipping a bunch of newscast stuff at night. So yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a lane change, but I'm enjoying it so far. But it's good to be back and doing this in my free time as well.
I'm excited for when the worlds collide, when you get to write a Vikings article. I want to read that. I hope it's like a 1,500-word beast.
Oh, that has happened a couple times already, and I crack the knuckles and get back into it. Like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. This is my lane.
All right, from afar, because you've been consumed with the new job, I want to know your observations about training camp because we have about a week and a half of it in the books. We had a pretty sweet press conference to get things started. We've seen some breakout from players that I think you're going to get into, but I'll let you run with the quantity. Let's just start and go back and forth for about 25, 30 minutes. Players that have stood off the page because don't look now, we are less than 4 weeks from roster trim downs from 91 men to 53. Who's one guy that you're like, whoa, that guy's doing the thing?
I think number one, the guy that's kind of surprised me the most, at least from what I've read from afar, in terms of training camp, is wide receiver Jalen Naylor. This dude obviously missed a good chunk of the 2023 season between injuries, and I don't even remember, was he even around for much of training camp last year, or did he get hurt that early?
So this is a funny story. One of my dirty little secrets is I will take the same topics I've used in years past, so like early risers at training camp or strength of schedule articles, and then reframe them for the current content. I looked at last year's just for the hell of it. Jalen Naylor, top of the list for early risers at training camp. So maybe not to this magnitude, but he did this early at Vikings training camp last year.
Sure.
So there is a little Irv Smith to it where we're like, oh, he's going to do it. This is the year. But I want to know from you, especially with Naylor as the guy out of the gate for you, do you think this one is sustainable?
I think his talent is it's proven itself between his college and even his rookie year at the NFL level. I thought he showed a lot of things between Michigan State and then that first year with the Vikings, that his talent is definitely legit and he can contribute to an NFL roster. It's just going to come down to, can this guy stay healthy? And obviously that's still a big what if between all the injuries that he had last year. But I think if he is able to do that, and it seems like he's doing that so far this year in training camp, he can definitely contribute to this Vikings roster. And man, would it be just the absolute perfect time for this guy to finally come into that role where we've kind of been waiting for it between the end of 2022 season where he really kind of broke out, and then we were waiting for it in 2023 and it never really happened. And now the Vikings desperately need somebody to take over that wide receiver 3 role. Obviously Brandon Powell is still around and he can fill that if needed. But if Jalen Naylor can be like that young guy, then you have 3 wide receivers between Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Jalen Naylor, who are all still very young. And obviously Jefferson's going to start getting paid here soon, but between Addison and Naylor, they're still pretty much going to be on rookie scale contracts for the next couple of years. So having those 2 guys plus Jefferson, I think that would be really huge for the Vikings moving forward.
And Naylor could be a vitality or requirement if Jordan Addison's would-be suspension kicks in. I don't know the time frame of that, if that's going to be weeks 1 through 3 or something. Then you're going to look around the roster and say, we need Naylor. We need Powell to do something, especially if somehow J.J. McCarthy sneaks in there and you want the guy to get off to a good start. One thing I will say about Naylor, I want Vikings fans to remember, there's going to be a play this year where people are going to realize he's fast as hell. He's not just, oh, he's got deceptive speed. No, the guy he's a burner. His nickname is Speedy, and he will put any speed from Addison or Jefferson to shame in a foot race. So I want folks to remember that if he does stay healthy, there's a lot more to it than just WR3. The guy is really quick. All right, who's next? Jalen Naylor, probably. I don't know if he'd fit Mr. Mankato's criteria. I don't know if you can be a third-year guy, but he would probably be the winner overall for training camp based on somebody who came out of nowhere. Who's next?
I think I'd like to talk about the rookie Dallas Turner a little bit as well. Just it seems like everything that has been reported out of Vikings training camp is, yeah, he hasn't necessarily had a really outstanding training camp to this point, but we also have to keep in mind that he's going against Christian Darrisaw, one of the best left tackles in the entire league for the majority of his snaps. So if he were going against maybe an average left tackle, he probably would be doing a little bit better than what the production has suggested so far for the Vikings. But I think just the fact that he's at least holding his own, and with this Vikings edge group that's definitely deeper than it has been in years past, but I feel like there's still a lot more uncertainty in terms of Jonathan Grenard really only has one great year under his belt with Houston, and then Andrew Van Ginkel between his injury history, and he's definitely been he's more of the Swiss Army knife of that group rather than just being a pure pass rusher. So if Dallas Turner can just be the guy where they pin his ears back and rush the passer, I think he's a very valuable asset to this Vikings defense, and obviously he is that because they took him in the first round. But just the fact that he's getting out there kind of holding his own against one of the best left tackles in the entire league, I think that's very promising moving into his rookie season when the Vikings essentially stole him towards the middle end of the first round.
Did you watch Hard Knocks at all yet?
I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet.
Oh, they did. I didn't watch this week's yet, but last week's was the draft episode, and they were spitballing scenarios. And when they got to the Falcons, they're like, Dallas Turner's going there, like it was a no-brainer. And somehow he fell to, was it 17 for the Vikings after a portion of a King's ransom trade by the Vikings. On Dallas Turner, how soon will we see him? First quarter against the Giants? I mean, will it be that quick?
I think he's definitely going to get on the field. I don't know if he's going to start, but he's definitely going to be like one of those first couple pass rushers to rotate in, I feel like. And I think with Brian Flores and how he likes to switch guys in and out of the defense, I think that they're going to be doing a lot of those substitutions. And I think he's going to get on the field at least relatively early and relatively regularly as well.
And are you content, even if the middle of the defensive line is a little skimpy, are you content with the pass rush on the whole?
I think, yeah. I mean, obviously, you'd like to have a really solidified defensive tackle in there as well. But I mean, between the guys that they've got at edge, like we've already talked about them, and then just how Brian Flores likes to blitz the absolute shit out of every single opponent that he faces. I think that the Vikings are going to be able to get away with the middle of the defensive line being a little bit more suspect.
And then let's just, for the umpteenth straight year, we'll hope that they next offseason either use whatever first round pick they have, or the free agent crop isn't quite like last year's, but there should be one or two they can target. All right, Jalen Naylor, Dallas Turner, who's next?
Let's go a little bit more to the negative side here, and talk about the secondary a little bit.
Sure.
I think it was PA that reported either last week or maybe a couple weeks ago that Cameron Bynum was getting some snaps at the cornerback position, and I just think that that's just such a huge indictment on a guy like Andrew Booth, who's coming into his third year and just hasn't really found a role with this defense yet. And the fact that we're taking a safety who was arguably one of the top 10 safeties in the entire league last year and putting him at cornerback when you've got a bunch of other cornerbacks in that roster, obviously with everything that's happened this summer between Kyrie Jackson and then Mekhi Blackman on the first actual practice of training camp. It's a little bit thinner now, but there are still bodies in that room. And the fact that we're taking one of the top safeties in the league and potentially moving him over to that cornerback spot, it doesn't sit right with me. And Jay Ward, I think, has actually gotten in there as well, which isn't as surprising to me because he definitely played a little bit of every single spot in the secondary for LSU during his collegiate career. But yeah, just Andrew Booth not really finding his spot. And you got to think that at some point the Vikings are just going to say, all right, we can't find a role for you. You're going to have to go somewhere else and try to solidify your NFL career and try to rejuvenate it. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is at this point.
Yeah, we'll get an almighty verdict on August 27th on Scene and Booth. I think both are firmly on the roster bubble for about a week or two there after Kyrie Jackson's passing and then Blackman's injury. I was like, God, Andrew Booth's job, man, that thing is safe as hell. But then they've signed like 4 defensive backs in the last 8 days. So now it's like, all right, he's back to where he is. About 20 minutes ago, I asked Sal Spice on this show about Duke Shelley, and she is one of the loudest proponents of Duke Shelley. But I'm going to ask you, is this guy going to make the roster? Is he going to be able to ball out like he did 2 years ago? Or is he going to just be a camp body that doesn't make the cut?
I think at this point, he's got a decent chance at making the roster at the very least. I don't know if we're going to see what we saw in 2022, where he just takes over that starting cornerback role and just runs with it all the way to the playoffs. But just because this dude's like 5'8" and $160, $170, something like that. I mean, he's not built to hold down a boundary cornerback spot for the long term. And I don't necessarily think that he's going to capture a starting role or anything like that. Hopefully Shaq Griffin is able to bounce back from his injury and get up back on the field and solidify his spot in that defense as well. But I think Duke Shelley's, just because of his veteran presence and the fact that he's been with this team before and doesn't necessarily know Brian Flores' system, but I mean, he knows Kevin O'Connell and he's got a good relationship with him. At least I'm assuming so, because they brought him back again. But I'd pump the brakes a little bit on the idea that he's going to jump into a starting role and be everything that we saw down the stretch of 2022 again.
Yeah, it would, if somebody would have told me, let's see, a week and a half ago that the Vikings are going to sign 4 defensive backs and the ones you'll be most excited about is Duke Shelley, I would have been like, what? Like they didn't get Gilmore, they didn't get Akella Witherspoon. They know Jacoby Francis, even NFL guys like me, I've never heard of him. I do know Bobby McCain a little bit, and then Fabian Moreau is just kind of like a guy. So they're adding a bunch of players to, I think, play in the preseason. We shall see if they make the roster, but cornerback will continue because of rotten luck to be a point of emphasis. And it was just the secondary was the one really poor spot of the Vikings defense last year, that if they could just figure that out or make it average, the rest of the enterprise can hopefully climb into the top 10. So you're high on Naylor as a standout, Dallas Turner, low on Booth, waiting for a verdict on him. What do we got after that?
Next, let's go through this QB room a little bit.
Yeah.
Everything seems to be positive with JJ McCarthy, and that's super exciting. I did see there was this clip of Sam Darnold throwing an interception to Cam Bynum. I think he was covering Justin Jefferson and just had him absolutely blanketed, which is honestly more exciting about the Cam Bynum aspect of that than anything else. I don't know why everybody was running with this as a negative thing, but Sam Darnold's interception, and everybody was like, oh, this dude's a bum, but this is a rookie mistake, everything like that. I don't know, man. I think it's the first real week of training camp, and I wouldn't necessarily hold that against him too much. I mean, we've seen Kirk Cousins throw really dumb passes early on in training camp before, and it's not like this is something that's completely out of the blue for an NFL quarterback to come in a little bit rusty to training camp. Obviously, Sam Darnold's not a premier player, and he's definitely got to work to earn that starting role, but I don't know. I feel like both of these QBs have shown about exactly what I'd expect out of them coming into camp. And I think it's like Kevin O'Connell said yesterday, it's basically a tie between those two for the starting role, which I think is exactly what a Vikings fan should want at this point, where you've got a veteran guy who's taken snaps at the NFL level before and hasn't necessarily had the greatest amount of success in the world. But I mean, that Carolina season was pretty dang good, even though it kind of went under the radar because he was playing with a really bad Panthers team. And then you got JJ McCarthy, who you take with the 10th overall pick, just hoping that he can turn into something. And it seems like he's starting to do that. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be the week 1 guy at this point, but just the fact that he's staying competitive in that battle for QB1, I'd be stoked if he was battling for QB2. The fact that he's battling for QB1 is absolutely fantastic at this point. So I think just the fact that we've seen both of these guys kind of step into this role and really take this battle head on, I think it's a really positive thing for the Vikings.
So because you and I talked for probably cumulative hours about Drake May and JJ McCarthy, because I was so high on Drake May, and predictably, he's doing the opposite for the Patriots right now. He's leaps and bounds behind Jacoby Brissett, which is kind of the knock on him that he was going to have a raw redshirt year. Is it surprise you that we're not seeing any of that from McCarthy? I mean, the only thing we can get is a Dove Kleiman interception clip where Dove Kleiman's like, yeah, this guy's struggling. That's the only bad thing we can find about McCarthy, and that was a bullshit tweet. Are you surprised that McCarthy looks this poised this early?
I'm really not all that surprised. I mean, obviously he's a really young guy, but he's been in some of the biggest moments in college football. Like, this dude was playing for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, won a national championship. He had to be mentally prepared to go into that sort of role and find the success that he did at Michigan. And this dude is about as hard of a worker as you're going to find among the rookie quarterbacks in this class. So I'm not super surprised by that. And it's just a testament to just his work ethic and what he does. And I think the Vikings have done a lot with tweaking his mechanics over the past few weeks too. So just the fact that he's getting that part down as well, it's super promising for his NFL career. And yeah, I can't say I'm not all that surprised. I didn't think it was going to happen this quickly, but I did think that eventually he's going to take over the starting role probably this season at some point. And the fact that it's a conversation in July is just it's awesome.
And what were I'd have to pull these up. Were your rankings Caleb, Jaden, Drake, JJ?
Yes.
Or did I get that?
Yep.
Okay. And then for your purposes, you don't think Penix or Nix will amount to too much?
Yeah, for Penix, it was kind of just the injury thing more than the actual talent. And then Bo Nix is keep him far away. Keep him far. The Broncos and Sean Payton can deal with him all day long.
Yeah, that's what they're doing right now. And they're either gonna sell him to us as the QB1, or that Jared Stidham is this undercover badass. All right, let's see. That's good to get the quarterbacks on record. A lot of people probably tune into the show just for that. What's next on the agenda?
Yeah, I got one more guy to talk about. It's Ivan Pace at that linebacker spot. Seems like the first padded practice, he was absolutely lighting it up. And that's really great to see that it doesn't seem like so far he's dealing with anything of a sophomore slump, which would have been pretty easy to do considering this dude went from undrafted to just being a absolute star for the Vikings and just taking on the starting role almost immediately for the Vikings. So it probably would have been a little easy for him to be like, all right, I kind of got this. I can settle down a little bit. But doesn't seem like that's happening so far. And without Jordan Hicks in the mix, I think he's going to they're going to need him to continue to be as productive as he was last year, if not even more so, just because Jordan Hicks was a perfect complement to him in terms of a blitzing partner, where both of them were really great at getting into the trenches. Whereas Blake Cashman now, I feel like he's definitely a little bit more of a coverage linebacker rather than a guy who's going to mix it up in the line of scrimmage a little bit more. So I think Brian Flores is going to need Ivan Pace, and it seems like he's answering the call so far. So really good to see from him.
Yeah, I'm glad they have the salt and pepper for the linebackers, because we can, if we want, finally deploy Ivan Pace more like Micah Parsons, like a diet Micah Parsons, and then we'll need all the coverage help we can get. We already know that. Even if the best case scenario that Chat Griffin's a baller and so is Murphy, we're going to need some coverage help just based on the sins and scars of last year. All right, so if that's your list, I got a couple questions for you, putting you on the spot. What's one thing you got wrong about this Vikings offseason that stood out that you're like, I can't believe they didn't do that, they did do that, or I can't believe I got it wrong?
I really thought that they were going to try to go out and find another wide receiver. I thought that wide receiver 3 role, I have faith in Brandon Powell, and now I have a little bit more faith in Jalen Naylor as well, that both of those guys can kind of hold things down. And I'm happy that the Vikings ultimately didn't listen to me and go get a wide receiver 3. But I really thought that they'd end up, especially with Justin Jefferson's injuries last year, and that being a little bit more of a question mark, and then the contract thing. And now that's all settled as well. So that's completely gone, and we don't have to deal with that again for the next 4 or 5 years. So that's awesome. But yeah, that wide receiver 3 spot, I thought that was really surprising that they didn't go get it. But at the end of the day, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah knows a lot more than I do. So I'm glad he didn't listen to me.
Well, it's because they had so many opportunities, probably a dozen
Yeah.
free agents, and then we talked ad nauseum about all of the WR3 types in the draft. Speaking of which, now that we know what teams they're on, do you have a deep sleeper wide receiver for folks' I guess probably dynasty drafts?
I'd have to go back and look again. It's honestly, it has been a while since I've actually gone and looked at a lot of the different teams' draft classes. So let me get back to you, and I can bring that answer to you next week.
Okay, I think you, if I'm not mistaken, you either liked then or might still like Roman Wilson on the Steelers.
Roman Wilson, yeah, but I think he's dealing with an injury now.
Okay.
So I think that has kind of dampened that a little bit. I don't think it's super serious or anything, but I'm kind of waiting and seeing if that ends up. But Roman Wilson was a guy going into the draft that I really liked, and Jamari Thrash as well. So
yeah,
I'm hoping both of those guys can ball out this year and prove me right.
What about a surprise cut on the roster? Even though we'll talk to you a few times before then, somebody that we're gonna like the Armin Watts from 2 years ago. We're like, what? I thought he was a starter.
Oh man. Let's see. I don't know if this is necessarily a surprise, but it might be Jaron Hall, honestly. Just because it seems like JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold are doing exactly what they need to do. And I was kind of flip-flopping on this earlier this spring, where would it be Nick Mullins maybe, but I think that they might want to keep him around just for the veteran presence. And I don't know what happens with Jaron Hall at this point.
Yeah, probably a practice squad, and then you hope that no team swipes him, although he may not be needed. The reason that I would lean Mullins to make the active roster, and I may not have had this logic 4 or 5 years ago, is that they saw what happened at quarterback last year. Right. And I'm going to guess Kevin O'Connell never wants that to happen again, where you have to go trade for a Josh Dobbs and hope for the best. Because if let's say they cut Nick Mullins and then injuries beset the quarterbacks again, we're going to say, well, where's Nick Mullins? And I just don't think they're going to let that get to them again. Whereas he's just a better reliable patch starter than Jaron Hall. That's where I'm at. What about a surprise dude to make the roster?
I think it would be Dwight McGlothern at that cornerback spot. It seems like he's been doing pretty well in training camp so far, and with all the help that they needed that CB spot, evidently, it seems like a wide open race, and it's a perfect spot for a UDFA to come in and just steal a job.
And then my last one, the end of July Super Bowl prediction. Which two teams make it?
Oh, man. Well, I bet against the Chiefs last year, and that ultimately bit me in the ass.
I think we all did.
Yeah, so I'm going to stick with the Chiefs. I just can't. I have to trust Patrick Mahomes in the AFC. And then for the NFC, honestly, it feels like it might be the Lions, man. I think it's going to be the Lions. I know Vikings fans aren't going to be super excited to hear me say that, but they put everything together last year and they run it back with a very similar roster and only more talent around Jared Goff. So I think that it's Detroit's year to make it in the NFC, but the Chiefs will ultimately win that game.
I think we're going to see a lot of runner-up predictions for Detroit. If you follow me for a second. So rarely do teams get back to the Super Bowl and lose the thing twice. That just doesn't happen a lot. There's usually a hangover or a curse for Super Bowl runner-ups. So that will have some folks somewhat low on the 49ers. The Eagles' collapse last year is still mystifying. I'm going to guess they figure it out a little bit. The Cowboys didn't do a damn thing in free agency. Their draft was good, but they didn't really improve. And then after those ones, you look around the landscape of the NFL, and it's either the Lions, the Packers, or you think that Cousins can really work, or the Rams. So I think the Lions are going to be a sexy pick or maybe predictable pick to at least get to the Super Bowl. And that's because they were, an hour away from going to the Super Bowl last year before their mammoth collapse.
Yeah, pretty much. And 12-5 last year, NFC North champs for the first time. But yeah, and especially that NFC North is going to be so competitive that I feel like whoever wins that division is ultimately the team that feels like the favorite to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl this year.
It's wild how the NFL can shift, because 2022, when the Vikings went 13-4, I remember reading articles about how that was the worst division in football, and that's the only reason the Vikings were any good. And I was like, oh, well, this works. We'll take it. And then now, I don't know if I've read any division power rankings, but I'm sure it'd be the AFC North and the NFC North, because of the sudden upheaval. Jordan Love looks good. The Lions have completed their rebuild. The Bears have Caleb, and dudes like us on this show think the Vikings can be good. So it's been a total reversal. All right. Anything else that we're forgetting you want to get off your chest before we chat next week?
Not really. I think we kind of covered it. Glad we got this first Rust Buster out of the way for me.
All right, my man. We'll be back in 1 week. In this segment, I'll be able to reflect on what my son and I saw at training camp, and we will go from there. Okay.
Sounds great, man. See you then. Have fun.
Great to have you back. Take it easy.